At my baby shower, my mother-in-law Linda stood up during the gift opening and declared in front of everyone, "Let's hope this baby is better than the last one." The room went silent. My hands froze on the gift I was unwrapping, a tiny yellow onesie that suddenly felt heavy in my trembling fingers. Daniel's face went white as he stared at his mother in disbelief. Our guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they had heard correctly. But Linda wasn't done. She continued with a cold smile. "After what happened to Michael, we need to make sure this one actually survives." The cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the baby kick inside me as if responding to the tension. I never imagined that the woman who raised my husband would use our greatest tragedy as ammunition at what should have been one of our happiest moments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The foundation of this nightmare was built on grief that Linda refused to let heal. 2 years ago, Daniel and I lost our 3-year-old son, Michael, in a drowning accident at a family pool party. It was the kind of tragedy that breaks families apart, but somehow Daniel and I grew stronger together through our shared pain. We went to counseling, we grieved properly, and slowly we began to heal. The decision to try for another baby wasn't made lightly, and when we discovered I was pregnant, we were cautiously optimistic about our future. Linda, however, never moved past Michael's death. She blamed me from the moment it happened, though she never said it directly. It was in her cold glances when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she would mention how careful she had been with Daniel when he was small, the subtle comments about mothers who don't watch their children closely enough. Daniel defended me fiercely during those dark months, but Linda's resentment festered like an infected wound. I should have seen the warning signs before the baby shower. Linda had been unusually involved in the planning, insisting on helping with the guest list and decorations. When I suggested we keep it small and intimate, she argued that we needed to celebrate properly this time, as if our joy over Michael had somehow been excessive or premature. She made comments about how different things would be now that we were more experienced parents, always with that pointed emphasis that made my stomach clench. The morning of the shower, Linda arrived early at the Oakwood Park Community Center, taking charge of the setup with military precision. She arranged the chairs in a circle, placing herself directly across from where Daniel and I would sit, like a judge presiding over our celebration. When guests began arriving, she greeted them with updates about my pregnancy that felt more like medical reports than happy announcements, mentioning my doctor visits, my diet, and even my exercise routine, as if she were monitoring my every move. My mother, Carol, noticed Linda's strange behavior immediately. She pulled me aside while Linda was busy repositioning the gift table for the 3rd time and whispered that something felt off about the whole atmosphere. My best friend Amy, who had known me since college, kept shooting worried glances between Linda and me, clearly picking up on the underlying tension that seemed to follow my mother-in-law like a dark cloud. The shower started normally enough, with games and laughter filling the community center. Linda participated with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, making appropriate comments and even winning the baby food guessing game. But I could feel her watching me constantly, studying my every reaction and interaction with our guests. When it came time to open presents, she positioned herself where she could see everything clearly, commenting on each gift with observations about its practicality or safety features. Then came the moment that shattered our celebration. I was opening a beautiful hand-knitted blanket from my coworker when Linda suddenly... At my baby shower, my mother-in-law Linda stood up during the gift opening and declared in front of everyone, "Let's hope this baby is better than the last one." The room went silent. My hands froze on the gift I was unwrapping, a tiny yellow onesie that suddenly felt heavy in my trembling fingers. Daniel's face went white as he stared at his mother in disbelief. Our guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they had heard correctly. But Linda wasn't done. She continued with a cold smile. "After what happened to Michael, we need to make sure this one actually survives." The cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the baby kick inside me as if responding to the tension. I never imagined that the woman who raised my husband would use our greatest tragedy as ammunition at what should have been one of our happiest moments. Before we jump back in, Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The foundation of this nightmare was built on grief that Linda refused to let heal. 2 years ago, Daniel and I lost our 3-year-old son, Michael, in a drowning accident at a family pool party. It was the kind of tragedy that breaks families apart, but somehow Daniel and I grew stronger together through our shared pain. We went to counseling, we grieved properly, and slowly we began to heal. The decision to try for another baby wasn't made lightly, and when we discovered I was pregnant, we were cautiously optimistic about our future. Linda, however, never moved past Michael's death. She blamed me from the moment it happened, though she never said it directly. It was in her cold glances when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she would mention how careful she had been with Daniel when he was small, the subtle comments about mothers who don't watch their children closely enough. Daniel defended me fiercely during those dark months, but Linda's resentment festered like an infected wound. I should have seen the warning signs before the baby shower. Linda had been unusually involved in the planning, insisting on helping with the guest list and decorations. When I suggested we keep it small and intimate, she argued that we needed to celebrate properly this time, as if our joy over Michael had somehow been excessive or premature. She made comments about how different things would be now that we were more experienced parents, always with that pointed emphasis that made my stomach clench. The morning of the shower, Linda arrived early at the Oakwood Park Community Center, taking charge of the setup with military precision. She arranged the chairs in a circle, placing herself directly across from where Daniel and I would sit, like a judge presiding over our celebration. When guests began arriving, she greeted them with updates about my pregnancy that felt more like medical reports than happy announcements, mentioning my doctor visits, my diet, and even my exercise routine, as if she were monitoring my every move. My mother, Carol, noticed Linda's strange behavior immediately. She pulled me aside while Linda was busy repositioning the gift table for the 3rd time and whispered that something felt off about the whole atmosphere. My best friend Amy, who had known me since college, kept shooting worried glances between Linda and me, clearly picking up on the underlying tension that seemed to follow my mother-in-law like a dark cloud. The shower started normally enough, with games and laughter filling the community center. Linda participated with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, making appropriate comments and even winning the baby food guessing game. But I could feel her watching me constantly, studying my every reaction and interaction with our guests. When it came time to open presents, she positioned herself where she could see everything clearly, commenting on each gift with observations about its practicality or safety features. Then came the moment that shattered our celebration. I was opening a beautiful hand-knitted blanket from my coworker when Linda suddenly... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Get out," he said, his voice rising to a level one had never heard before. "Get out of here right now before I say something I can't take back." Linda seemed genuinely surprised by his reaction, as if she had expected him to nod along with her twisted logic. "Daniel, I'm only trying to protect this family," she said, reaching toward him with a gesture that might have looked motherly to an outside observer. "After what we went through with Michael, we can't afford to make the same mistakes again." The mention of our son's name in that context pushed Daniel over the edge completely. He stepped between his mother and me, his body language shifting into something fierce and protective. "Michael's death was not Jessica's fault," he said, his voice now carrying throughout the entire community center. "It was an accident. A horrible, tragic accident that has haunted us every single day for 2 years. And you standing here trying to blame my wife for our son's death is the most disgusting thing I have ever witnessed." Our guests began to shift uncomfortably, some gathering their purses and gifts as they realized this family confrontation was far from over. My coworker Janet quietly slipped out with several others, clearly wanting no part of the drama that was unfolding. But my closest friends and family remained, forming a protective circle around me as Daniel continued his devastating response to his mother's cruelty. "You want to talk about protecting this family?" Daniel continued, his anger building momentum. "Then let me tell you what would actually protect this family. It would be having a grandmother who supports us instead of one who uses our deepest pain as a weapon." It would be having someone who honors Michael's memory instead of cheapening it with this garbage. Linda's face began to change as she realized that her son was not going to back down or see things from her perspective. The confident smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion and growing desperation. "I raised you better than this, Daniel," she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "You used to listen to your mother's wisdom. I'm only trying to help you see what everyone else is thinking but is too polite to say." The implication that our friends and family secretly agreed with her assessment sent another wave of shock through the remaining guests. My father, Robert, who had been quietly seething since Linda's first statement, finally spoke up. "Nobody here is thinking that except you, Linda. What we're all thinking is how cruel and inappropriate this is. Jessica has been an amazing mother, and what happened to Michael could have happened to any of us." Amy nodded vigorously in agreement, her loyalty evident as she placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Jessica loved Michael with every fiber of her being," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Watching her grieve and slowly heal has been one of the most inspiring things I've ever witnessed. How you can stand there and try to destroy that healing is beyond my comprehension." Linda's strategy shifted as she realized she was losing the room completely. She tried to backtrack, softening her tone and attempting to frame her attack as concern rather than cruelty. "I think everyone is misunderstanding me," she said, looking around for any sign of support. "I love Jessica, and I want this baby to be healthy and safe. I'm just worried that grief might have clouded her judgment about being ready for another child." But Daniel was having none of her attempted manipulation. "No, Mom, we understand you perfectly," he said with a coldness that made me shiver. "You've made it clear what you really think of my wife and our marriage. You've shown everyone here exactly who you are, and there's no taking it back now." The finality in his voice seemed to hit Linda like a physical blow. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked uncertain, glancing around the room at faces that reflected disappointment, anger, and disgust, rather than the support she had apparently expected to find. Linda's face crumpled as the reality of the situation finally penetrated her delusion. She looked around the room desperately, searching for any ally among the guests who might validate her position or at least show some understanding of her concerns. Instead, she found faces filled with disgust, disappointment, and barely contained anger. Even the guests who didn't know our family well seemed appalled by what they had witnessed. "I think I should leave," she said quietly, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. She began gathering her purse and jacket with shaking hands, the transformation from righteous authority figure to confused and rejected woman happening in real time. But Daniel wasn't ready to let her simply walk away from the destruction she had caused. "Yes, you should leave," he said, his voice still carrying the edge of controlled fury. "But before you go, I want you to understand something very clearly. What you did here today wasn't just inappropriate or hurtful. It was unforgivable. You took the most painful experience of our lives and used it as a weapon against the woman I love while she's carrying your grandchild." Linda paused in her packing, looking up at her son with eyes that seemed to be seeing him clearly for the first time. "Daniel, please," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I didn't mean for it to come out that way. I'm just so scared of losing another grandchild. The thought of going through that pain again terrifies me." For a moment, I saw a glimpse of genuine vulnerability in Linda's expression, and despite everything she had just put me through, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Grief could make people do terrible things, and I knew from my own experience how fear could twist love into something destructive. But Daniel had moved past the point where explanations or apologies could make a difference. "Being scared doesn't give you the right to attack Jessica," he replied firmly. "Being afraid doesn't justify what you just did in front of our family and friends. And it certainly doesn't excuse trying to blame her for Michael's death, which is exactly what you just did whether you want to admit it or not." My mother stepped forward, her protective instincts fully activated as she watched me struggling to hold myself together. "Linda, I think you need to consider what kind of relationship you want to have with this family going forward," Carol said with surprising steel in her voice. "Because what happened here today has consequences. Big ones." The weight of those words seemed to hit Linda like a revelation. She looked from my mother to Daniel to me, as if suddenly understanding that this wasn't just a heated family argument that would blow over in a few days. The bridges she had burned with her cruel outburst might not be repairable, and the grandchild she claimed to be protecting might become permanently out of her reach. "I want to be part of this baby's life," Linda said desperately, her earlier defiance replaced by pleading. "I want to be a good grandmother. I want our family to be close and loving like it used to be before everything went wrong." Daniel shook his head slowly, his expression hardening rather than softening at his mother's emotional appeal. "The family you're talking about never existed, Mom. What we had before was me making excuses for your behavior, and Jessica being too kind to call you out on your passive-aggressive comments and subtle blame. Today you just said out loud what you've been thinking all along." The accuracy of his assessment was devastating in its clarity. I realized that Daniel had been watching his mother's treatment of me far more closely than I had given him credit for. He had seen the little digs, the pointed comments, the way she managed to make me feel inadequate and guilty without ever saying anything directly actionable. Today's explosion wasn't an aberration, it was the culmination of 2 years of barely contained hostility. Amy squeezed my shoulder gently, reminding me that I had people in my corner who truly cared about my well-being. "Jessica," she said softly, "do you want to go home? We can wrap this up and get you somewhere more comfortable." The concern in her voice was exactly what I needed to hear after Linda's attack. But I found myself wanting to stay and face this confrontation head-on rather than retreating. Something about Linda's public humiliation of me had awakened a strength I didn't know I possessed. I struggled to my feet, one hand supporting my growing belly, and looked directly at my mother-in-law for the first time since her devastating announcement. "Linda," I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be, "I need you to hear something very clearly. Michael was the light of our lives. He was smart, funny, loving, and absolutely perfect in every way that mattered. His death was not my fault. It was not Daniel's fault. And it was not a reflection of our parenting abilities. It was a tragedy that no amount of vigilance could have prevented." Linda's eyes filled with tears as I continued, but I wasn't finished. "What you did today tells me that you've never actually grieved for Michael properly. Instead, you've spent 2 years nursing anger and blame that has poisoned your heart, and now you want to bring that poison into our new baby's life." The room was completely silent as everyone absorbed the power of my words. I felt Daniel move closer to me, his presence offering strength and support as I continued to address his mother. "I won't let you do to this child what you've tried to do to me. I won't let you turn every milestone and celebration into an opportunity to relitigate Michael's death or question my worthiness as a mother." Linda wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse, her makeup now smeared, and her composed appearance completely destroyed. "Jessica, I never meant to hurt you," she said, but her words sounded hollow after everything that had transpired. "I love you like a daughter. I love this family." "No," I replied with conviction that surprised even me. "Love doesn't look like what you showed us today. Love doesn't use a child's death as ammunition in family arguments. Love doesn't publicly humiliate someone at their baby shower. What you showed us today wasn't love, Linda. It was cruelty disguised as concern." The finality of my statement seemed to drain the last bit of fight out of Linda. She finished gathering her belongings in defeated silence, while our remaining guests watched the dissolution of a family relationship in real time. Linda stood frozen by her chair, clutching her purse against her chest like a shield. The tears streaming down her face had turned her carefully applied makeup into dark streaks, making her look older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. For a moment, the room held its breath as we all waited to see what would happen next. "I'm not the villain here," she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength as desperation took hold. "I'm the only one brave enough to say what needs to be said. Everyone else is just being polite, but I know what they're really thinking." She looked around the room wildly, seeking validation that simply wasn't there. "You all saw how careless she was with Michael. You all know what really happened that day." The accusation hit me like ice water, and I felt my knees go weak. Daniel immediately stepped protectively in front of me, his whole body radiating fury. "Don't you dare," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't you dare try to rewrite history to make yourself feel better about what you just did." But Linda had passed the point of rational thought. The rejection from her son and the horrified stares from our guests had pushed her into a corner, and like any trapped animal, she was lashing out with everything she had. "Fine," she said, her voice rising to match Daniel's intensity. "If everyone wants to pretend that day was just an innocent accident, then go ahead, but I won't pretend anymore. I won't smile and nod and act like Jessica deserves another chance to destroy our family." My father Robert had remained quietly supportive throughout the confrontation, but Linda's latest attack finally pushed him beyond his breaking point. He stood up slowly, his considerable height making him an imposing figure as he faced my mother-in-law. "That's enough," he said in a voice that brooked no argument. "I was there that day, Linda. We all were. And what happened was a terrible accident that could have occurred no matter who was watching." Linda turned on him with wild eyes, apparently deciding that if she was going down, she would take everyone with her. "You're her father, of course you're going to defend her." But the rest of us saw the truth. We saw how distracted she was, how she wasn't paying attention. Michael died because his mother was more interested in socializing than watching her child. The cruelty of her words sent a collective gasp through the remaining guests. Amy stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "I cannot believe what I'm hearing," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Jessica has tortured herself over that day for 2 years. She's replayed every second, wondering if there was something different she could have done. And you standing here trying to validate her worst fears is absolutely monstrous." But Linda wasn't finished with her devastating assault. Having crossed the line into outright cruelty, she seemed determined to inflict maximum damage before her inevitable exit. Maybe if she tortures herself enough, she'll finally understand that some people shouldn't be mothers. Maybe if she feels guilty enough, she'll make better choices this time. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet we had experienced earlier. This silence was heavy, with the weight of relationships being permanently severed and words that could never be taken back. I could feel the baby moving inside me, responding to my elevated heart rate and the stress hormones flooding my system. Daniel's response came in a voice so cold and controlled that it was more frightening than his earlier anger had been. "Get out," he said quietly. "Get out now and don't ever come back. You are no longer welcome in our home, at our celebrations, or anywhere near our family. You've made your choice, and now you get to live with it." Linda's face went pale as the finality of his words hit her. "Daniel, you can't mean that," she whispered, reaching toward him with a trembling hand. "I'm your mother. I gave birth to you, raised you, loved you. You can't just cut me out of your life over one argument." "This isn't one argument," Daniel replied with devastating clarity. "This is you revealing who you really are when you think you have nothing left to lose. This is you showing our unborn child's entire extended family that you're willing to weaponize tragedy for your own twisted purposes. This is you proving that you care more about being right than about the well-being of the people you claim to love." My mother moved to stand beside Daniel, her support for his decision clear in her posture and expression. "Linda, I think you need to leave before this gets any worse," Carol said firmly. "You've already done enough damage for one day." The united front presented by my family and friends seemed to penetrate Linda's defensive shell, and for the first time since her initial outburst, she looked genuinely frightened by what she had unleashed. "This baby is my grandchild too," she said desperately, her voice breaking on the words. "You can't keep me away from my own grandchild. I have rights." The mention of rights sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. There was something ominous in the way she said it. Something that suggested this confrontation might not end with her simply walking away in defeat. Daniel must have heard it too, because his expression shifted from anger to something approaching wariness. "Your rights as a grandmother exist at our discretion," he said carefully, as if he were choosing his words for an audience beyond just the people in this room. "And after what you've done today, after the things you've said about my wife and my dead son, you've forfeited any claim to a relationship with this child." Linda's face hardened at his words, and I saw something calculating flash in her eyes that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "We'll see about that," she said quietly, her earlier desperation replaced by something that felt like a threat. "Blood is thicker than water, Daniel, and courts understand the importance of grandparents in a child's life." The implied legal threat hanging in the air changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. What had started as a family argument had just escalated into something far more serious and potentially long-lasting. I felt Daniel's hand find mine and squeeze it protectively as we both realized that Linda's exit from our baby shower might not be the end of this nightmare, but rather just the beginning of a much larger battle. The legal threat hanging in the air transformed the entire atmosphere of the room. What had been a family confrontation filled with raw emotion suddenly felt calculated and dangerous. Linda's mention of courts and grandparents' rights wasn't just an empty threat thrown out in anger. It was a strategic warning that she had been thinking about this possibility long before today's explosive confrontation. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened as he processed what his mother had just implied. "Are you seriously threatening to take us to court over visitation with a child who isn't even born yet?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and growing alarm. "After everything you just said about Jessica's fitness as a mother, you think a judge would side with you?" Linda straightened her shoulders, and I watched as she seemed to shift into a different persona entirely. Gone was the emotional, desperate woman who had been pleading for understanding just moments before. In her place stood someone who looked almost businesslike, as if she were already strategizing her legal approach. "I think a judge would be very interested to hear about the circumstances surrounding Michael's death," she said, with chilling composure. "I think they would want to know about the pattern of negligence that led to that tragedy." The audacity of her statement sent shockwaves through our remaining guests. My mother Carol let out an audible gasp, while Amy moved even closer to my side as if she could physically shield me from Linda's verbal assault. The idea that Linda would actually pursue legal action based on lies and distorted facts about Michael's death was almost too horrible to contemplate. "There was no negligence," Daniel said firmly, but I could hear the strain in his voice as he tried to maintain control. "Michael drowned in a pool accident that happened in less than 30 seconds, while multiple adults were present. The police investigated thoroughly, and no charges were filed because no crime was committed. You're talking about fabricating evidence and perjuring yourself in court." Linda's smile was cold and calculating as she responded to her son's logical arguments. "I'm talking about presenting my observations and concerns to a family court judge who will be tasked with determining what's in the best interest of this child. I'm talking about making sure my grandchild doesn't suffer the same fate as Michael because everyone was too polite to speak up." The transformation in Linda was so complete and disturbing that I found myself wondering if this had been her plan all along. Had the baby shower outburst been genuine emotion, or had it been a carefully orchestrated first step in a larger campaign to gain control over our family? The possibility that she had been manipulating this entire situation made me feel sick to my stomach. My father Robert stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger that matched the intensity of his words. "Linda, I've known you for 10 years, and I've never seen you display this level of cruelty and manipulation. If you pursue this insane legal threat, you'll be doing it without a shred of credibility or support from anyone who knows the truth about what kind of mother Jessica is." But Linda seemed immune to reason or shame at this point. She had committed to her course of action, and nothing any of us could say was going to deter her from it. "The truth is that Jessica was responsible for Michael's safety that day, and she failed," she said with devastating coldness. "The truth is that she's pregnant again without addressing the issues that led to his death. The truth is that this family is so invested in protecting her feelings that they're willing to risk another child's life." The twisted logic of her argument was breathtaking in its audacity. She had taken a tragic accident and reconstructed it as evidence of criminal negligence, then used her own psychological manipulation as proof that our family was enabling dangerous behavior. It was a masterclass in gaslighting that left me feeling dizzy and disoriented. Daniel released my hand and stepped directly in front of his mother, his face inches from hers as he delivered what would be his final words to her. "If you file any legal papers, if you contact any lawyers, if you make any attempt to interfere with our family through the court system, I will make sure that every person you know understands exactly what you did here today. I will make sure your former colleagues at the school district know that their respected principal spent her retirement years harassing her pregnant daughter-in-law, and exploiting family tragedy for personal gain. The threat of social and professional consequences seemed to give Linda pause for the first time since she had mentioned legal action. Her carefully constructed facade cracked slightly, revealing uncertainty beneath the calculated cruelty. But her response showed that she was still committed to her destructive path. "Do whatever you think you need to do, Daniel," she said quietly, gathering her jacket and purse with renewed determination. "But understand that I will do whatever I think I need to do to protect my grandchild from repeating Michael's fate. If that means going to court, if that means exposing uncomfortable truths about this family, then so be it." As Linda moved toward the door, I found my voice for what I knew would be the last time I would ever speak to her. "Linda," I called out, causing her to pause with her hand on the door handle. "I want you to remember this moment, 20 years from now, when you're wondering why you never got to know your grandchild. I want you to remember that you chose legal threats over love, accusations over support, and cruelty over kindness. You did this to yourself." She turned back to look at me one final time, and for just an instant, I saw something that might have been regret flash across her features. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the hardened expression of someone who had burned every bridge and was prepared to live with the consequences. "Goodbye, Jessica," she said simply, and then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of people struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The silence that followed her departure was heavy with the weight of what we all knew was coming next. This wasn't over, it was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.